Welcome to the exam preparation for AZ-700, Designing and Implementing Microsoft Azure Networking Solutions. My name is Karl and I'm a technical trainer within Microsoft. This video series will guide you through the essential strategies for talking and taking the AZ-700 exam. Our focus is on exam preparation, not teaching the concepts. We will cover the objectives, best practices, tips and tricks, and exam key points. This video will also include a lot of visual information for reference. Remember, you can pause the video at any time to review the content. This video series is your comprehensive guide to exam preparation, covering essential topics and providing valuable study resources. Be sure to also make use of labs, study guides, and practice tests. And also focus on the skills highlighted during the exam prep course to make sure you are prepared. Now, the free trainings mentioned as prerequisites will give you the experience you need to be successful in this course. Once you feel confident in your understanding of the content, it's time to take the exam. Now, let's get started. This exam prep video series will help you to identify what we will be covering on the exam, gain insights on preparing for the exam, and determine which concepts to prioritize, revisit for further study. Now, keep in mind that this series is not a replacement for official Microsoft training or your interactive lab experience. While it will guide you on what to expect on the exam, it won't teach you the topics in detail. Use it to spot any knowledge gaps and focus your time and resources accordingly. In this video series, each episode will cover one of the 5 groups in the objective domain. Now, these groups are focusing on designing and implementing of core network infrastructure, manage connectivity services, implement application delivery services, private access to Azure services, and Azure network security services. Now, each group has a specific weight, indicating the percentage of questions that will come from each area. Currently, episode 1 is the most heavily weighted section, so you may consider focusing more on your study time here. However, to pass the exam, you need to be familiar with skills in all groups. Let's dive into the content of episode 1. We will cover how to design and implement IP addressing for Azure resources, name resolution, VNet connectivity, and routing and monitoring networks. Here is a list of the different skills you may be tested on. Now, these are sometimes referred to as may include, meaning they may or may not be on your exam. This list isn't exhaustive, and while we won't be covering every skill in this video, be sure you are able to perform these skills before taking the exam. Let's continue to look at the different skills you may be tested on. And like I previously mentioned, this list does not cover all possible elements. And while we won't be covering every skill in this video, be sure you are able to perform these skills before taking the exam. Here is what you need to know for the exam. Every virtual network must have at least one IP address space assignment. And a VNet space assignment can either be IPv4 address space only or IPv4 and IPv6. Virtual networks are then further partitioned into subnets, which receive one or more network prefixes as well at creation time. And even though it's not required, it is highly recommended to use address ranges within the private, non-internet routable address spaces. Now, for IPv4, this will be one of the IP ranges defined in the RFC 1918. Azure will reserve 5 addresses in each subnet for internal use. The first 4 IP addresses and the last IP address in an Azure subnet cannot be allocated to resources for reasons that are showed on this screen. When you create a VNet in the Azure portal, use an address space that is not already in use in your organization, either on premises or even in other VNets, and it does not overlap with other network ranges. Make sure that subnets do not cover the entire address space of the VNet. While planning for a subnet, remember that certain Azure services require their own subnet, such as a gateway subnet or bastion subnet. And subnets can be used for Traffic Manager to route traffic through a virtual network appliance, And remember for the exam that you can secure your VNets by assigning network security groups to the subnets beneath of them. Now use subnet delegation when you need to offload some network management aspects of that to the subnet to Azure itself. And remember to select the service that you want to delegate the subnet to. This table shows you the resources you can associate a public IP address with, such as virtual machine, internet-facing load balancers, VPN gateways, and application gateways and NAT gateways. The recommended way to provide explicit outbound access to a VM is through a NAT gateway and then associating them to specific subnets. Now, another option available is using outbound rules in Azure public load balancers. Know that the global tier allows a public IP address to be used with cross-region load balancers. A public IP address prefix is a reserved range of Microsoft-owned public IP addresses in Azure. Make sure you know which prefix sizes are available for IPv4 and IPv6. You're also allowed to use your own public IP address in the Azure platform. It's almost the same like public IP address prefix, but here's what's the difference. Now, a custom IP address prefix is a contiguous range of IP addresses owned by you, and Microsoft is then permitted to advertise the range. Remember that this can be done in 3 phases to bring an IP prefix to Azure: validation phase, provisioning, and then commissioning. Let's look at Azure Private DNS. Now, the main thing I want to call out here is how to do name resolution within your internal network inside Azure or across hybrid connections to on-premises. Remember, by creating an Azure Private DNS zone, you can choose any DNS suffix, one that is simpler and easy to remember instead of the Azure DNS default names. You will also have the central visibility and capability to create DNS records within the Azure portal, and also additional features like testing the resolution and explore DNS metrics. Make sure you know the 2 different ways of configuring DNS inside of a VNet. You can use your own DNS solution, or you can create a private DNS zone and then leverage the Azure provided name resolution. With the default DNS configuration, you are using Azure DNS, and all requests will be forwarded to 168.63.129.16. Now remember this IP address for your exam. If your applications are already inside of Azure, you can leverage Azure DNS for public domain name hosting. So you can create address records manually within relevant domain zones. The records most frequently used will be host records, which are A records, or alias records, which are CNAME records. Now, this is important for the exam. Private DNS zones in Azure are available to internal resources only, but these resources can be global in scope, so you can access them from any region. Now, private DNS zones are highly resilient, being replicated to regions all throughout the world, but they are not available to resources to the internet. Know that you do not have to own a domain name to create that DNS zone in Azure DNS. Once the public domain is pointed to Azure's name servers, Azure DNS becomes the authoritative source for all DNS requests and queries related to that domain. The main thing I want to call out here is that you need to link Azure Private DNS Zone to a VNet before it can be used. Make sure you understand that Azure Private DNS Resolver runs a DNS forwarder and can create a custom configuration to forward certain name resolution requests to an on-premises DNS server. When you create Azure DNS Private Resolver, you need to define interfaces that will be presented inside of your virtual network, both for inbound and outbound resolution. And this would be a great exercise to practice in a lab. The main thing I want to call out of VNet peering is that you always need to have two peerings between any two peered VNets, and that you have options like allow traffic that is forwarded, allow gateway transit, and allow remote gateways. Understand that these allow or deny functions will allow or deny the transition of traffic through different VNets. Azure Virtual Network Manager is a toolset with different capabilities around topology and routing management. Remember for the exam that a connectivity configuration offers 3 topology options: mesh, hub and spoke, and or hub and spoke with direct connectivity between spoke virtual networks. Also know that the security admin enables the creation of global network security rules. To make use of forced tunneling, you can associate a route table with a subnet. In this example, we have the DMZ subnet. So there is a network virtual appliance inside of that DMZ subnet. And if you need to ensure all traffic from the front-end subnet goes through the NVA to the backend subnet, you make use of a user-defined route. In this example, you show how to associate a route table with a subnet and send traffic from the subnet through a firewall, or through a virtual appliance in this case. By doing this, you will override the system routes and add your own user-defined routes. Forced tunneling lets you redirect all internet-bound traffic from Azure VMs to your on-premises network via a site-to-site VPN, and you do that for inspection and auditing. Now, in this example, the front-end subnet is not forced tunneled, and it will accept and respond to customer requests from the internet directly. Now, the mid-tier and backend subnets are forced tunneled, and all traffic to the internet will be forced or redirected to an on-premises site. This will be a great exercise to practice the use of Azure Network Watcher in a lab to diagnose and resolve routing issues. You will use Azure Routes Server when you require to dynamically exchange routes with SD-WAN devices, offering connectivity to networks outside of Azure. Remember that your NVA needs to support BGP. In this case, you no longer need to manually update the routing table on your NVA whenever your virtual network addresses are updated. And you no longer need to update user-defined routes manually whenever your NVA is going to announce new routes or even withdraw old ones. The way how we use NetGateway at Microsoft is to provide explicit outbound access to a virtual machine. Creating a NAT gateway will allow you to associate it to a specific subnet, and all virtual machines in that subnet do not require a public IP to have outbound internet connectivity. They will use the NAT gateway. To deploy a NAT gateway resource, create a regional or zonal, which is zone isolated, NAT gateway resource, assign IP addresses, and if necessary, modify the TCP idle timeout. Make sure you know how to troubleshoot network issues with Azure Network Watcher. Azure Network Watcher provides a suite of tools to monitor, diagnose, view metrics, and also enable or disable logs for Azure resources. Connection Monitor is used to understand which traffic flows will be allowed or denied in your Azure Virtual Network. It runs a simulation of the flow and returns detailed information about rules allowing, denying the flow. Azure Monitor Network Insights provides a visual representation of the topology. You also have health and metrics for all deployed network resources. It also provides access to network monitoring capabilities like Connection Monitor, NSG flow logs, VNet flow logs, and traffic analytics. IP Flow Verify checks if a packet is allowed or denied to or from a virtual machine. The NSG diagnostics tools outputs whether traffic was allowed or denied and provides detailed information for debugging. Next Hop helps you understand whether traffic is being directed to the intended destination by showing the next hop. By using Microsoft Defender for Cloud Secure Score and also attack path analysis, you can view insights and detect potential attack paths. Remember for the exam that you must enable Defender Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM solution, and you have agentless scanning enabled. Now we have some important guidelines for you to follow. First of all, upgrade your static basic SKU public IPs to the standard SKU using the Azure portal. Configure user-defined routes that point to a virtual network gateway, and then you can enable service chaining. You can also deploy hub and spoke networks, where the hub virtual network hosts a virtual network appliance or even a VPN gateway. To recap, in this episode, we discussed how to design and implement IP addressing for Azure resources, name resolution, and VNet connectivity and routing, and also monitor networks. Now remember, this group counts for 25 to 30% of the exam, so keep that in mind when preparing for the exam. Now, thank you for watching the AZ-700 exam prep video series, and we hope that this series helped you understand the skills that you are strong in and areas where you might need to revisit. Remember that understanding these concepts is crucial for your success, and be sure to leverage other exam prep resources such as the study guide, practice assignments, and exam sandboxes.